Greetings, Hotep. Assalamu alaikum, students. This is Dr. Willie Davis, sometimes called Baba Kubwa Kweku, and I am the owner and the director of All Around the African World Museum and Resource Center. And today I'm going to bring you information about the origin of African Americans or people of African descent in this hemisphere, especially Central, South, and North America. There's a book called They Came Before Columbus, and Brother Ivan Van Sertima done extensive research on the presence of people of African descent 2,000 years ago, especially in Mexico, where a number of huge stone heads 8 to 10 feet tall and weighing several tons were found with African features. And he illustrates all of the various components to show that Africans were here in the hemisphere so long ago. With the heads, also, he looked at archaeological resources. He also looked at fruits, vegetables that have been transported across, and also has been documented that Native Americans also went to Africa in those early days. And it also has been it's shown that the Olmec civilization was most likely an African American civilization in the Americas. So we've been here a long time and have had influences, especially later on, especially in a number of inventions and ways to release some of the pressures that were put upon us as slaves to reduce our workload. And so it's been some time after that, especially in 1504, where you saw much more of an influx of Africans coming in through Spain and Brazil, not only in North America, but in Central America, and again, especially in South America, especially in Brazil. And so from that time up until 1619, there had been a steady influx of people of African descent, as slaves. And in many cases, replacing Native Americans who had been designated as slaves, but they refused in many cases to work, and many times because they knew the lay of the land, they could escape, into the various areas around. So they were replaced then by slaves. And some of the terrible aspects of that as well, too, a number of Native American populations were decimated. The Taino Indians in Cuba, also in Puerto Rico, in many cases were almost nearly exterminated. So you had a number of players in this area in terms of dealing with slavery. And then sometimes you would find that many times the slaves and Native Americans had some things in common and also began to link with each other as well. But the most significant time, especially dealing with what we might call slavery, and again, perhaps as legalization, was in 1619, and it's recorded that some 20 odd Africans came, and generally as possibly prisoners of war to the Americas, but they were called Africans and not slaves. And it wasn't until 1641 in Massachusetts that an actual slave law was passed. So they were considered by many as indentured servants. And so the argument rages whether they were slaves or indentured servants, but the institution of a legal system of slavery did not really exist until that law was passed in 1641. But there was a number of resistances also to what was happening. There were many revolts. I think one as early as 1630, and we know in 1704 there was also revolts against the slavery system. In fact, there were by some accounts, between 250 and 350 slave revolts before the Civil War began. So we've had always this resistance to slavery. While labor was forced, there were also other developments that were going on. And so we began to see linkages of people of African descent, for even as early as the Revolutionary War. The first person killed in the Revolutionary War was Crispus Attucks, a Black man. So there's always been some linkages of people of African descent. And also, after the Revolutionary War, we also saw some resistance. Some may call it passive resistance, but even in the system of church, in fact, in the U.S. and Philadelphia, where people of African descent were not allowed to go to some of the churches. So Absalom Jones and Bishop Allen actually created the African Methodist Episcopal Church in the late 1790s. And of course, during that time, we also saw some issues or dealing with revolts as well, too. In 1791 up until 1804, we had the Haitian Revolution, and they became independent from France, the first African American nation within this hemisphere to claim their independence. Also, too, in 1822, Brazil also freed themselves from Portugal. And I bring that point up, although they were not what you might call an African American nation, number of people of African descent outnumbered those in the United States. And even today, there are more people of what we might call of African descent in Brazil than there are actually in the United States. So there's always been a linkage between the Caribbean, South America, as well as the North America as well. And many look at the Caribbean as what we might call the training grounds for slaves that would be distributed to South America as well as in North America. And we even have Belize also to Central America and Yucatan Peninsula, not far from the area where the heads were found of the Olmec civilization, and also had a number of independent movements, especially from the Griffina. So there were across the Caribbean, South America, and North America, extreme resistance to slavery. And if we were to limit to our U.S., again, if we look in 1831, you had the most famous, that of Nat Turner, which had some chances of being successful, although it was later put down. You had in 1839 the Amistad ship, where the Africans took over the ship and inadvertently steered it towards the United States, where it actually went to court for their freedom. And John Quincy Adams, the former U.S. president, defended the sailors or the people from the Amistad, and they were able to return back to Africa. A Creole ship 2 years later in 1641 also was part of that ships going back, overcoming the crew and getting their freedom and going back to Africa. And we move on to even 1859, where you have John Brown at Harper's Ferry, actually a white man actually leading a slave revolt. Some 2 years after the Dred Scott decision, which had labeled people of African descent as permanent slaves, which also, as you see, led up on to the Civil War itself. And so in 1863, we also have the Emancipation Proclamation, which Lincoln proclaimed that freed the slaves in all of the states that had seceded from the Union. Many don't know that it didn't free those slaves that were in the states that did not fight against the Union, who were later freed later in 1865 through the 13th Amendment. So that's the history of our relationships as slaves and the battle to free ourselves as from slavery through a number of both physical and also other passive resistance as well, especially looking at those that came through much of our religious orientation as well. And as we can see even later, how important the church has been in the liberation of people of African descent. So I hope that this gives you some measure of the presence of people of African descent from some 2,000 years ago, culminating in the first ones actually coming here in many cases before the institution of slavery was officially established as indentured servants. And that argument will go on, but it's good to recognize the independence of some of our African descendants. So thank you, and more power, especially in the essay. And I know that there will be a lot of great presentations, and there will be many ideas presented. Thank you.